Hey there, adventurer. I'm Norwolf. Welcome to my role-playing game realm. So in a previous video, and I'll put a link to it somewhere up there, I believe, I was talking about For Against Darkness and playing it how you want to play. This time, I'm going to dive into wilderness exploration and talk about what my approach is to what my approach is going to be and what references I'll be using for this approach. So, in front of me, one of the publications I have for 4AD is the Tales from the Adventurers Guild, and I referenced it in the last video as well. And this is going to be a source of a lot of the inspiration for how I want to approach wilderness exploration. So in here, of course, they use hexes, and in my humble opinion, all wilderness should be done on hexes, but that's beside the point. You're free to do your wilderness how you want. They do have a kind of a starter map in here that you could use for your wilderness. I am actually going to use a custom map, so we'll be ignoring this. But they do have some really basic procedures for how to go about, determining what your hexes look like and things. A little bit more useful in here is where they're talking about random encounters, and they have. So they're saying for planes, just use the Tales from the Adventurers Guild encounters in here. I'm not sure that necessarily works for me. They talk about outside of town, things like that. I may incorporate some of these tables into what I'm doing, but I think I'll be going with some thoughts that I'll talk about a little bit later on here. For hills, they suggest the For Against Darkness book or Warlike Woes. For mountains, more mountainous mayhem, and potentially even using Caves of Cobalt Slave Masters as one of the adventures within the mountains. When you get to the forest, they talk about the Crucible of Classic Critters. You want to zoom in on a hex and actually do an exploration within the hex. Actually, similar for the mountains. The more mountainous mayhem, you can use those for kind of zooming in on the hex itself. Let's see. They also suggest that you could use the Three Rings, Man-Eater, or Fortress of the Warlord within the forest hexes. With the provided map that they have, they suggest which specific forest to use those in. What I'll probably end up doing is when I have a group of forest hexes or something like that, I'll just insert these adventures at some point. If you have a temple, or if you come across a temple hex, you can use the Lost Temples of Quara, however you say that. And for ruins, as you come across ruins, you can use Ravagers of Ruins. And then for the Abyss, if you want to include that, or when you want to include that, you can basically just add it into a dungeon that you create with the For Against Darkness dungeons. Basically, as soon as you find a staircase leading down. For the Cursed Town, they suggest the Ravagers of Ruins. And you could also use basically underneath the ruins, you can find a necromantic dungeon. You can generate that using either the Ghastly Mind theme that's in this book or the Digressions of the Devouring Dead, which is a separate publication altogether. And there's another option which I'll actually talk about a little bit later on as well. They also suggest, comment here that in the Dolomite Hills, there's a pair of dragons. And then for settlements, you can use the Lantern issue number 2 for Treacheries of the Troublesome Towns, or use the settlement information that they've got in this book as well. So we'll dive into that a little bit more as I get further along here. And then, of course, there's adventures within the settlement, things like Affairs of the Heart, or whatever else you can come across. So let's dive into the first publication that I want to talk about here. And that would be Wilderness Exploring. So this is a small little 10-page supplement that Doug Peterson put together, and this is from February 2021. I can find a link, I'll drop a link into the notes down below as to wherever I got this from. Some of this stuff that I'll be referencing is available on Facebook, I believe, the Facebook group for AD. But I'm violently against Facebook. I figure it's just well, I won't even get into it here. But anyways, I don't use Facebook, needless to say. So this publication, this little booklet, it uses hexes, which is, again, I guess always a bonus. And it provides a basic procedure for exploring hexes. So you pick the hex, you roll for the terrain, you move into the hex, you roll the features, you roll whether there's a river and a road, and then you roll for encounter, which is either a wandering monster of some sort or place. It has, some basic terrain determining. It gets into the features you encounter: roads, rivers, ruins, etc. What it costs for moving between those hexes or into those hexes. Determine the encounter. And yeah, so it's a pretty basic book. It's got a little bit of an equipment and rations list here. This is fairly consistent between all the books, but a little bit too basic for my wants or desires, I guess. And I also feel that there may be, I don't need as many variations in the terrain. Like I guess I'm not necessarily looking for tundra or light woods or heavy woods, and mesas and cliffs and things like that. I also feel that the inhabited places may be a little bit too frequent. So 10% of the time you're running into hamlets, villages, towns, or cities. And for my wants, I'm going to be pre-populating a couple of predetermined towns or villages, and don't expect to find a whole lot in the rest of the map. Or if I do, then there'll be inhabited places that are either struggling or under the control of some sort of a boss or something. So we'll get to that. So that is wilderness exploring. The next little publication that I came across is Overland Adventures. And this is by Lowell Foster and some pretty cool art by his daughter. I actually kind of like the art in here. For a sixth grader, it's some great stuff. But anyways, so in this book, it uses squares, which is, I guess, one of the things I'm not keen on in here. But it does provide a similar wilderness exploring procedure. Basically, you determine the terrain, you determine roads, you determine features, and it's got a lot of different features, and then you determine events, and of course it's got a lot of different events. It doesn't have any rivers, though, which I feel is an important aspect of getting some major river water features into the map. But it does have some good 2d6 tables that I'll probably end up modifying. So basically, the 2d6 table, you can get swamps, desert, hills, forest, rural farmland, mountains. And then it has an event table that can give you wasteland, or can create wasteland. The road procedure is fairly basic. And then as I said, the special features, I'll probably use something like this, but modify it. I don't want necessarily as many towns or stray inns being found in the wilderness. I'm looking at my wilderness being a little bit more of a going into an unknown land or unpopulated maybe has ancient ruins and things like that. It's a little bit more of a traditional hex crawl exploration sort of thing into the unknown wilderness. Some of the terrain features are pretty interesting. Prospector cabins, dungeons, dragon lairs, destroyed villages, fortresses. So I'll probably incorporate some of these into my custom tables that I'll eventually create. And one of the nice things in here is, aside from the various and sundry special events, which could be encounters, wandering monster encounters, weird monsters, whatnot, they've got some interesting tables for lost travelers, things like that. And wilderness, or I guess random encounter tables by terrain, which I think is going to be particularly useful. So I'll probably use either these tables or something similar to it. Weather, one thing about weather, I think I'd like to see weather as a separate role for each day as opposed to a special event. In here they have, where is it? Somewhere in here anyways, they've got weather being an event. Oh, there it is. So roll of 10 on the 2d6 or a roll of 10 on a 2d6. So probably incorporate the weather tables into what I'm doing, but as a separate role for weather each day. Obstacles, I think that's going to be kind of cool. They have some information about wilderness casting. I'll kind of worry about that when I get into the actual gameplay. Some mundane equipment. I like the idea of setting up a camp in the wilderness that could be returned to by the current party or future parties that I run through. There'd be probably some chance of the camp being destroyed at some while there's nobody around, or don't believe they'd actually leave anybody there to guard it between adventures. So, and then they talk a little bit about strongholds, and I do like the idea of characters having the option to build strongholds. So I'll probably incorporate this into what I'm doing. So let's see, did that cover everything? Handy encounter tables, looking as weather as an event, rather than having weather as an event, coming up with separate weather tables. And I'd like to try out the stronghold tables here. So, yeah, and then you can do various and sundry things with the strongholds, like putting in blacksmiths and chapels and clothiers and crucibles and forges and all the rest of that kind of stuff. So I think that's really neat options for the future of characters exploring the wilderness. Another publication I ran across is Journey into the Unknown Lands, and this is by Jean-Philippe Millet, depending how you pronounce that. This was from April 2025. Again, another smaller booklet. And again, it uses squares. It provides a procedure for creating your hexes as well. Basically, you pick your destination square, you roll an event, which can include encounters, terrain, places, or dungeons. Not necessarily a fan of the event idea. Basically, your square, if I remember correctly, doesn't necessarily have a terrain if it has a dungeon. Basically, that dungeon becomes that square. And it also uses some sort of an averaging technique for terrain types around the square you're going into. And again, I'm not sure I necessarily want to do futz with something like that. It also has some basic town building rules. Inhabited places, village, town, city, what types of shops that place contains, and has some rules for resting, recovery, recruitment, those types of things, which may or may not be useful at some point. Some of this stuff I may incorporate into what I'm doing. But yeah, so that is the publication, and so they have an example of a map here and kind of how it was randomed up, and then they took that map and actually made a colored, nice looking version of that. So anyways, that's this book. So a few interesting things, but again, probably not something I'm going to focus on a lot. I kind of like the Overland's Adventure a bit more in that fashion. And then we get to the last publication here, which is the Tantalizing Trails of Turmoil and Treasure, or TTOTT, as I've put it in one of my notes here, but not sure that's the appropriate abbreviation for it. But this actually incorporates a bunch of different booklets. So Overland Adventures, which I've already mentioned here, Tome of Adventures, Crypt of Damnation Quest, Pocket Lands, and some human, elf, dwarf name tables. And I would love to find the Tome of Adventures booklet and Crypt of Damnation Quest booklet by Simone Agresta and Tex Willer. But these are on the 480 Facebook group file section. And of course, I've already mentioned that I'm somewhat opposed to Facebook and the essential virus that it is. So anyways, we won't go there. But again, this book uses hexes, uses a much more simplified terrain determination. It has, again, a basic process. You basically pick the terrain the hex you're going into, roll for the terrain, roll for the roads and rivers, roll for features, and roll for events. So I'll probably leverage, again, some of the information from this book. I like the information that's provided about some of the features. And so it'll be, and it uses a lot of information from Overland Adventures. So I'll probably, look at how I want to mix these two, or whether there's some things that were skipped in Overland Adventures that I might want to include. But yeah, it does a pretty good job of determining events. I'd probably modify these tables somewhat to suit my needs. But again, they've got the weather condition tables here, which I've already mentioned. I'll probably put into a separate weather role. Gets into some detail about the NPC encounters and various other encounters. So keen on using that part. And that's a die 20 roll for NPC encounter table. So yeah, we'll likely use a good chunk of that. Let's see, what else does this book do? Has the random encounter tables. Oops, I passed them. I think they're basically laid out the same as the Overland Adventures book. Dreadwolves, Cragbears. It has a few more thrown in here, a die 8 instead of a die 6. And between the 4 Against Darkness versus 4 Against the Abyss parties, so 1 to 5, 5 to, or 6 to 9, or 5 to 9, depending how you want to look at that. And yeah, so what else here? Gets into the monster descriptions, Overland hex rules. This section was a little bit confusing because they dive right into boarding a ship and doing ship movement. And it's not really talking about hex actions. And of course, the numbering was a bit off. But I'm not necessarily a fan of the terrain movement. I don't want to be spending 8 days going across a desert or mountain hex, or 6 days going across a swamp, jungle, or glacier hex. So I'm basically going to be doing, I think it was in one of the previous books here, or even the Tales from the Adventurers Guild, basically a standard Plains hex is going to be 1 day to cross. And then when you get into mountains or hills or things, that may be modified by additional days. Handy weapons equipment list. And what else here? And then things you can do, I guess, in the settlements: visit the alchemist, visit a hireling professional, visit the stable, visit a ranger, trainers, specialized healers, visit an enchanter, magic emporium. I'm iffy on the whole buying magic stuff, but we'll see. And then a settlement events table. So depending on whether I'm using the settlement information, the basic settlement information in the Tales of the Adventurers Guild, or getting into the other settlement books, which are the treacheries of the troublesome towns. This settlement events table may be come in handy. And then there's the quest generation, which I think is going to be particularly handy. And this is one of the publications I think that was mentioned at the beginning here. So the quest generation, this comes from this Tome of Adventures book. And basically can use this almost anywhere and gets referenced in the encounter tables. And then there is, get into the appendices. Tracking quests and side quests. I may grab this and create my own version of that. Get into dragon names, human names, dwarf names, and elf names. And then, let's see, Crypts of Damnation. So, another option for creating underground, or creating another type of location. So a crypt. Add ancient crypts into the random encounters, wilderness encounters. Then it comes with its own tile sets, and tables and everything else for it. As I said, I'd love to find this booklet somewhere other than Facebook. And they've got some information about guild rules. And they've got a Witcher class. I haven't really looked at that very closely. And then another option for how to do the actual hexes, or laying out the hexes. So that is the Tantalizing Trails of Turmoil and Treasure. So where does that leave me? So what I've done is taken the information from the Tales of from the Adventurers Guild and kind of laid it out into a table here. So for the planes, as I mentioned, they recommend using the tables from the Tales of the Adventurers Guild. I found those tables a little hard to figure out at times. So it may be that I'm just using random encounters and determining whether or not a dungeon appears in the plains as part of the randomness. For the hills, there's again using 4 against darkness or warlike woes for the random encounters, or the actual random encounter tables that I showed in the Tantalizing Trails book. You can use a clue to find the caverns of chaos. In the mountain hexes, more mountains of mayhem. If you want to dive into the dive into the mountainous hex, the option there is using the caves of the Cobalt Slave Masters. Again, maybe either throwing that as a random encounter, or again using something similar, burning off a clue or potentially 2 clues to have the caves of the Cobalt Slave Master show up. Although with my set of adventures, I've already gone through this. For the forest is, of course, using Crucible of Classic Critters if you want to dive into the forest hex and do a kind of a hex crawl within the hex, or just doing a random forest encounter. Other options here, they say you could use the Three Rings, Man-Eater, or Fortress of the Warlord. For the crypts, Crypts of the Damnation out of this book, or if you have the other publication, use the actual. Cursed Towns, if you come across those, using Ravagers or Ruins. And if you burn off a couple of clues, you can find the Necro Dungeon underneath the Cursed Town, and use either the Ghastly Mines theme from Tales or Digressions of the Devouring Dead. Running across temples, you can use the Lost Ruins of Quara for those random temples. Again, ruins, just using Ravagers of Ruins. Dungeons is just 4 against darkness, which can be showing up pretty much anywhere. Getting into the Abyss is basically the lower level of a dungeon, and of course using 4 against the Abyss. Wilderness Towns. So this is one where I'm still trying to figure out if I'm going to use it or not. But in Lantern issue number 2 here, they have this adventure for an uncharted settlement, and it basically has you figure out who's running the village or the town. I probably wouldn't have a city out there, but I probably would have at least villages or towns. And again, it's, who's actually controlling the town. It could be an evil tyrant, a dark pact, a warmonger, dragon, etc. So that could be an interesting adventure. And it uses a specialized square grid. But I also want to limit the size so that I can use my standard square paper that I'm using for dungeons. So I also don't expect that there would be a city or something massive settlement out in the wilderness. So anyways, that is that piece. Hex encounters, again, either the tables out of the Tantalizing Trails or using Fiendish Foes. And then for the aquatic hexes, using the tables out of Darkwater. So as I had mentioned, I've got, for basic towns, I'm just using the Tales of the Adventures Guild just to start out. And I think I showed this map previously. And this hex paper is what's based out of the Tales from the Adventures Guild book. I'm finding these hexes a little bit too small. But actually, before I get into the hex part of it, once I actually want to dive into the inhabited cities that I've put onto the map here, that's when I'll pull out the Treacheries of the Troublesome Towns and actually do a crawl through the town and create and generate the town at that point. As I said, the hexes I'm finding a little bit small here. I created this page and had it intended to just create points of interest. But I wanted larger hexes and the opportunity to potentially detail each hex as I get into it. So I've come up with a new page. This page has numbered hexes, and with those numbered hexes, painter version of the same page, it can have a hex number and have a description for the hex, and it gives me the option of populating as many hexes as I want with points of interest, and not really limited to just 17 at this point for what I'd originally planned in my original hex papers. So I'll at some point probably make these available somewhere, yeah. Anyways, we'll go from there. So that I still have to transfer this map onto this page. One of the things I did for the actual rivers is I wanted to plot some of the rivers out ahead of time, and there's as well as the known towns. So I've got a main large town, I think it was, or city, located kind of in the center, starting point. There's 2 towns along the coast, and then 1 village found further in, and I've drawn out the roads to those. For the rivers, I've assumed that each of the towns in the village would be on a river, and then basically just randomed the hexes or the rivers from this point. So I said, decided it was going to be, a die 6 roll of 1, 2, 3. I think it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and I rolled a 6, and then from here it was 1, 2, 3, 4 through 6. Actually, no, I would only go into this hex, so I automatically just drew into this hex, and then just used various random techniques to figure out, kind of which hexes this would eventually crawl to with a weighting towards the center of the map, and eventually had all these rivers join up. So we'll see kind of how that fares when I get into the other maps. So I won't necessarily be rolling for rivers, but I will be rolling for kind of other bodies of water, either small lakes or something like that. So that is the hex paper, and that is the towns and how I populate some of the information in the hexes, and what does that leave me with? So my hex crawl procedure is going to basically be rolling for weather with 2d6. A 2 or 12 will be using the special weather table. Otherwise, the weather won't be affecting the travel or anything. I may get into more details, like whether it's raining or windy or whatever, but I'll worry about that when, some future date if I want to get into that level of detail. Basically, they pick the hex they want to go into, roll the terrain using the tables from the Tantalizing Trails book. Roll for any roads or rivers, probably not rivers, but there may be some ancient roads that are found in some of those hexes that are outside of the predefined roads that I've got. And then roll for features. I'll be using a modified version of the Overland Adventures and or Tantalizing Trails book. Still going to have it based on whether it's the hex has a road or not, or no road in it. And then rolling on the events using a modified version of the Tantalizing Trails or Overland Adventures book. Already talked about my updated hex map system, so going to the larger numbered hexes. I just wanted, as I said, more space for description or for features, and wanted hex numbers. And what I still haven't figured out is what calendar system I'm going to use, how I want to track or conveniently track the dates for all the characters. So if you remember, I've got my Overland Adventures, and I've got my roster of the guild members, the Guild of Haphazard Heroes, and I basically have the 12 characters. These 4 characters, my ranger of their first level, the ranger, the beastmaster, a wood elf, and a paladin. Yes, the paladin's a bit odd. Probably I'm leveling him up, and eventually the druid, my 4th level or 5th level druid, will swap out the paladin. The paladin will adventure with these others. This will kind of be my outdoor adventuring group that'll be exploring the hexes, finding interesting sites that some of these other groups may delve into. And as I've shown previously, each character has their own page, so I can, conveniently snag a page or just pull out the pages of the adventures I'm using at the time. So I've got Keith or Calaith the Wood Elf, Fenric the Beastmaster, Saren the Ranger, and Vaylin the Paladin. They'll be doing the adventuring in the wilderness. I've got my previous characters here that already talked about, and of course my various and sundry pages that I'm using for my dungeon adventures. I'd like to use probably something similar. Actually, for the cities, I'll be using this page, or cities and villages and towns. And yeah, so that kind of covers off my thoughts, or the books that I've looked at for looking at kind of wilderness or hex exploration, and where I'm going to be going to next. So anyways, hopefully you found this interesting, and I guess we'll see where I get to with 4AD for the next time. So anyways, this covered off my some of my thought process of how I'll be approaching the wilderness exploring. I still have a bit of work to do on customizing some of my tables, and I'd like to get it into not having to use 2 or 3 different books, but probably summarize it into a few pages, and then have those pages that I can just reference as I start the adventures across land. So thanks for joining me. Oh, and as usual, like, subscribe, and hit the little bell icon. Tell your friends, all that wonderful stuff. See you later.